I am above the law, you black. The words echoed through the California district courtroom like a thunderclap, silencing every whisper, every shuffle, every breath. Judge Samuel Jackson, a man whose stern face and wire-rimmed glasses had presided over countless cases, leaned forward in his chair, his voice dripping with venom. His eyes, cold and unyielding, were locked on Representative Jasmine Crockett, a Democratic congresswoman who had just dared to challenge him. The room froze. The air felt heavy, as if the weight of those words had sucked the life out of the space. On one side of the courtroom sat an elderly black man, Mr. Clarence Thompson, his weathered hands trembling as he clutched a worn photograph of the home he'd once called his own. On the other side, the defendant, a white man named Richard Hayes, smirked faintly, his arms crossed, exuding the confidence of someone who knew the game was rigged in his favor. This was the seventh hearing in a case that should have been straightforward. 7 long, grueling sessions where Clarence, a man in his late 70s, had pleaded for justice. Years ago, he had rented his modest home to Richard Hayes, a tenant who seemed respectable at first. But Richard had other plans. He stopped paying rent, refused to leave, and eventually claimed the house as his own, exploiting legal loopholes and Clarence's lack of resources to fight back. Clarence, a retired factory worker who had poured his life savings into that home, was left homeless, sleeping on his sister's couch while Richard lived comfortably in the house Clarence had built with his own hands. The case had landed in Judge Samuel Jackson's courtroom, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor. But as the hearings dragged on, it became painfully clear that something was wrong. Judge Jackson seemed disinterested, dismissive of Clarence's evidence, and quick to adjourn each session without progress. Whispers of corruption began to circulate. Rumors that the judge had been paid off by Richard Hayes or someone connected to him started to spread like wildfire. Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in the Democratic Party and a fierce advocate for justice, had been following the case closely. She knew Clarence personally. He was a constituent from her district in Texas, and his story had touched her deeply. When she learned that the case was being heard in California, she made the trip to sit in the courtroom as a witness, determined to ensure that Clarence got the justice he deserved. But on this day, the 7th hearing, Jasmine could no longer stay silent. She had watched as Judge Jackson prepared to adjourn the case yet again, ignoring the mountain of evidence Clarence's lawyer had presented. She had seen the smug look on Richard Hayes' face, the defeated slump of Clarence's shoulders, and the judge's blatant disregard for the truth. Enough was enough. Rising from her seat in the witness gallery, Jasmine's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Your Honor, this is not an algebraic case. You are not delivering justice. I know you took a huge amount just to stall this case. You are indulging in corrupt practices, and I will not sit here and watch an innocent man suffer because of your greed. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Clarence's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking in them for the first time in months. Richard Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smirk fading. The other spectators, lawyers, court staff, and a handful of reporters leaned forward, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. And then came Judge Jackson's response, I am above the law, you black. The words hung in the air, a vile declaration that revealed not just corruption, but a deep-seated racism that shocked everyone in the room. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her fists clenched at her sides, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and determination. She had suspected the judge was corrupt, but this was something far worse. Judge Samuel Jackson wasn't just bought. He was a bigot. A man who believed his position gave him the right to trample on the lives of those he deemed beneath him. For a moment, no one moved. The court stenographer's fingers hovered over her keyboard, unsure whether to record the judge's outburst. Clarence's lawyer, a young public defender named Maria Alvarez, stared at the judge in disbelief, her legal pad slipping from her hands. Even Richard Hayes looked uneasy, as if he hadn't expected the judge to be so brazen. But Jasmine Crockett was not about to let this moment pass. She took a step forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her voice steady but laced with righteous anger. Your Honor, you have just exposed yourself. Not only are you corrupt, but you are a racist, a disgrace to the bench, to this courtroom, and to the very idea of justice. You think you're above the law? let me remind you that no one is above the law, not even you. Judge Jackson's face turned a deep shade of red, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as if he might leap over it. You have no right to speak to me this way, he bellowed. I will have you removed from this courtroom. But on Jasmine the seventh hearing, Jasmine turned could no longer stay silent. Her eyes She blazing had watched with as conviction. Judge Jackson Let the prepared record to show adjourn that the case Judge yet Samuel again, Jackson has ignoring admitted the to being above the law and has directed a racial slur at had seen the a smug sitting look member on of Richard Congress Hayes' face in open court. The defeated Let the slump
record
of
show that
Clarence's
this man
shoulders
is unfit
and
to
the
preside
judge's
over any
blatant
case,
disregard
let
for the
alone
truth.
one involving
Enough
a
was
black
enough.
man seeking
Rising
justice
from her
against
seat
a
in
white
the witness
defendant
gallery
who stole his home.
Jasmine's
The
voice cut
reporters
through
in
the
the back
courtroom
of the
like a
room
blade.
scrambled to take
Your
notes.
Honor,
Their
this
pens
is not
flying
an
across their
algebraic
notebooks.
case. You are
One
not
of them,
delivering
a
justice.
young journalist
I know you
named
took a
Emily
huge
Carter
amount
from a
just to
local
stall
news
this
outlet.
case. You
had
are
her phone
indulging
out,
in corrupt
discreetly
practices,
recording
and
the
I will not
exchange.
sit here
She
and
knew
watch
this
an
was about to
innocent
become a
man suffer
national
because of your
story.
greed.
Judge
The
Jackson
courtroom
slammed
erupted
his
and
gavel
gasped.
down.
Clarence's
The sound
eyes
reverberating
widened.
through
A
the
flicker
room.
of hope
This
sparking
court
in
is
them for the
adjourned.
first time
He
in
shouted.
months. His
Richard
voice
Hayes
trembled
shifted
uncomfortably in his
but
seat.
as he stood
His
to
smirk
leave,
fading.
something
The other
extraordinary
spectators
happened,
lawyers,
something that would
court
shock
staff,
everyone,
and a
and leave
handful
the
of
judge
reporters
with no
leaned
choice
forward,
but to confront
sensing
the
that something
consequences of his
monumental
actions.
was about to
Maria
unfold.
Alvarez,
And then came
Clarence's
Judge
lawyer,
Jackson's response.
jumped to her feet.
I am above the
Your
law.
Honor, you black.
I move
The
for an
words hung
immediate
in the
mistrial
air.
of
Your
vile
conduct is a
declaration
clear
that revealed
violation
not
of
just
judicial
corruption,
ethics,
but
and
a
I will be
deep-seated
filing a
racism
formal
that
complaint
shocked
with the
everyone in the
California
room.
Commission
Jasmine
on
Crockett
Judicial
stood tall.
Performance.
The
Her
judge
fist closed
clenched at her
mid-step,
sides,
his
her
hand
heart
on the
pounding
door to
with
his
a mix
chambers.
of fury
He
and
turned
determination.
slowly.
She
His
had
eyes
suspected
narrowing
the
as
judge
he
was
realized the
corrupt,
gravity of
but
what was
this was
happening.
something far
But
worse.
before he could
Judge
respond,
Samuel Jackson
another
wasn't
voice
just
joined
balked.
the fray of
He was a
voice that
bigot,
carried the
a
weight of
man who
years of
believed his
pain and
position
resilience.
gave him the right
Clarence
to trample
Thompson
on the
stood
lives
up,
of those
his
he
frail
deemed
frame
beneath him.
trembling, but
For
his
a
voice
moment,
steady.
no one
I've
moved.
been coming to
The
this
court
court
stood
for
up for
months,
fingers
hoping
hovered over
for
her
justice.
keyboard.
He said,
unsure whether
his
to
words
record the
slow and
judge's
deliberate.
outburst.
I've
Clarence's
lost everything,
lawyer,
my home,
a young
my
public
dignity,
defender
my
named
faith
Maria
in the
Alvarez,
system, but I
stared
ain't
at
lost
the
my
judge
voice.
in disbelief.
Judge Jackson,
her legal path
you've
slipping
shown your
from
true
her
colors
hand.
today.
Even
You don't
Richard
care
Hayes
about
looked
people like
uneasy,
me.
as
You don't
if he
care
hadn't
about
expected
justice.
the judge
All
to
you
be
care
so
about is your
brazen.
power
But
and your
Jasmine
money.
Crockett
But I'm
was
here
not
to
about
tell
to
you,
let this
you
moment
can't
pass.
break me.
She took
and
a
you
step
can't break
forward,
the truth.
her heels
the room
clicking
fell
against
silent
the polished
again,
floor.
but
Her
this time
voice
it was a
steady but
different
laced
kind
with
of
righteous
silence, a
anger.
silence filled
Your
with
Honor,
awe and respect
you have
for
just
Clarence's
exposed
courage.
yourself.
Jasmine
Not only
Crockett
are you
turned
corrupt,
to him,
but
but
you
you
are
are
softening
racist
with
with
admiration.
admiration. To the bench,
She walked
to this
over to his
court's room,
side and
and
placed
to
a
the
hand
very
on his
idea of
shoulder,
justice.
a
You think
silent
you're above
gesture
the
of
law?
solidarity.
Let me
Judge
remind you that
Jackson,
no one is
now
above the
visibly
law,
shaken,
not even
tried
you.
to regain
Judge
control.
Jackson's face
This
turned
is
a
my
deep
courtroom.
shade of red.
He
His
snapped.
hands
I will
gripping the
not
edge
be
of his
lectured
desk
by.
as if. But he was cut off by a sudden commotion at the back of the room. Emily Carter, the journalist, had uploaded her recording of the judge's outburst to social media, and it was already going viral. Within minutes, the video had been shared hundreds of times, with hashtags like #JusticeForClarence and #ExposeJudge Jackson trending across platforms. Outside the courthouse, a crowd was beginning to gather as news of the judge's racist remarks spread like wildfire. Inside the courtroom, one of the bailiffs approached the judge, his expression grim. "Your Honor, you need to see this," he said, holding up his phone to show the flood of notifications and comments condemning the judge's behavior. Judge Jackson's face went pale as he scrolled through the posts. The public outcry was immediate and unrelenting. People were calling for his resignation, for an investigation, for justice. Civil rights organizations were already issuing statements, and several prominent lawyers had announced their intention to file complaints with the state bar. For the first time, Judge Samuel Jackson realized that he was not, in fact, above the law. The power he had wielded so arrogantly was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He turned back to the courtroom, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The room was still, everyone waiting to see what he would do next. And then, in a moment that shocked everyone, Judge Jackson did something no one expected. He walked back to his chair, sat down, and looked directly at Jasmine Crockett, Representative Crockett. He said, his voice barely above a whisper, I owe you an apology. What I said was inexcusable. I have let my biases and my greed cloud my judgment, and I have failed in my duty as a judge. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Was this really happening? Was Judge Samuel Jackson, a man who had just declared himself above the law, admitting his wrongdoing? He continued, his voice trembling. I have been compromised in this case. I accepted money to delay the proceedings, and I let my prejudices influence my decisions. I am deeply ashamed of my actions, and I am sorry not just to you, Representative Crockett, but to Mr. Thompson, whose life I have made harder through my failures. Clarence's eyes filled with tears as he listened to the judge's confession. For months, he had felt invisible, his pain ignored by a system that was supposed to protect him. But now, in this moment, he was finally being seen. Judge Jackson took a deep breath and addressed the courtroom. I pledge to recuse myself from this case immediately. I will cooperate fully with any investigation into my conduct, and I will step down from the bench if that is what is required. But more than that, I promise to spend the rest of my life making amends for the harm I have caused. From this day forward, I will judge every case that comes before me if I am allowed to continue based solely on the truth and the law. And to Mr. Thompson, I say this. You will have your justice. I will ensure that this case is reassigned to a fair and impartial judge, and I will personally testify to the corruption that has tainted these proceedings. The room erupted in applause, a wave of emotion sweeping through the spectators. Jasmine Crockett, still standing beside Clarence, nodded slowly, her expression a mix of skepticism and cautious hope. She knew that words were not enough. Judge Jackson would need to prove his sincerity through his actions, but for now, this was a victory, a moment of accountability that would reverberate far beyond the walls of this courtroom. As the judge stepped down from the bench and exited the room, the crowd outside the courthouse grew louder, their chants of justice for Clarence echoing through the halls. Reporters swarmed Jasmine and Clarence as they left the courtroom, eager to hear their thoughts on the stunning turn of events. Jasmine spoke first, her voice steady and resolute. Today, we exposed a corrupt and racist judge, but this fight is far from over. We need to hold our justice system accountable at every level because no one is above the law. Clarence Thompson deserves his home back, and I will not rest until he gets it. Clarence, his voice soft but filled with gratitude, added, I never thought I'd see this day. I thank God for Representative Crockett, for her courage, and for all the people who stood with me. I just want to go home. The story of Clarence Thompson, Jasmine Crockett, and Judge Samuel Jackson became a national sensation, sparking a broader conversation about corruption, racism, and the fight for justice in America's courts. For Clarence, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he would finally reclaim the home that had been stolen from him. For Judge Jackson, it was a humbling reckoning, a chance to confront his own failures and work toward redemption. And for Jasmine Crockett, it was a reminder of why she had entered public service in the first place, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. As the sun set over the California courthouse, the crowd outside continued to chant, their voices a powerful reminder that justice, though often delayed, could not be denied forever.